The year is 1944. The location is the frozen thin air 25,000 feet above the European continent. It is a world where human beings simply cannot exist without machinery. The temperature outside the aluminum skin of the aircraft is 60 degrees below zero, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in seconds. This is the domain of the 8th Air Force, the mighty 8th. They fly the B-17 Flying Fortress, a 30-ton giant of war designed to take a beating and keep flying. But inside this fortress, there is one position that no one asks for, one position that demands a specific, terrifying kind of courage.
They called it Tail End Charlie. To understand the isolation, you have to understand the geography of the plane. To reach his post, the tail gunner has to leave the relative warmth of the radio room and crawl. He moves on his hands and knees through the fuselage, past the tail wheel, maneuvering through a narrow, dark tunnel as the plane tapers down to a point. He is moving away from the heart of the ship, away from his brothers.
At the very end of that tunnel lies a tiny compartment, barely larger than a phone booth, enclosed in plexiglass and armor plate. Here, the gunner sits on a small bicycle-style seat. He is suspended over nothing. When he looks down between his fleece-lined flying boots, there is no floor, just 3 miles of empty void and the patchwork fields of enemy territory waiting to swallow him. He is 60 feet away from the pilot. If the intercom wire is severed by shrapnel, he isn't just alone. He is effectively an astronaut cut loose in space.
The silence back there is heavy. While the pilot, co-pilot, navigator, and bombardier are clustered in the nose and cockpit, able to tap each other on the shoulder or offer a thumbs up, the tail gunner is sealed off. He is wrapped in layers of bulky, electrically heated gear, wearing an oxygen mask that often froze to the face with the condensation of his own breath. His entire world is defined by the twin 50-caliber Browning machine guns mounted in front of him. They are his only companions. They are the only thing standing between the crew and destruction.
The Luftwaffe pilots were smart. They learned very quickly that attacking a B-17 from the front was dangerous. The formations were too tight, the forward firepower too heavy. So they hunted the stragglers. They hunted from the rear. They would dive out of the blinding sun, aiming specifically for the tail. A tail gunner spent hours staring into the gray haze, straining his eyes, knowing that he was the primary target. To kill the bomber, the German fighters knew they first had to silence the sting in its tail.
Imagine the psychological toll. The vibration of the 4 Wright Cyclone engines hums through the metal frame, rattling your teeth. You are 20 years old. Back home in Ohio or Kansas, you were bagging groceries or fixing cars just a year ago. Now you are scanning the horizon for the flicker of a Focke-Wulf 190. You know the statistics. The life expectancy of a bomber crewman was roughly 15 missions. For a tail gunner, the odds were often worse.
And there was another darker reality to this seat. The tail was the most fragile structural point of the aircraft. If the plane took a direct hit from heavy flak, the fuselage could snap. Furthermore, the compartment was so cramped that the gunner could not wear his parachute. The chute pack was usually stowed in the fuselage behind him, just 3 feet away, but in a death spiral with G-forces pinning you to the wall, those 3 feet might as well be 3 miles.
On this particular morning, Sergeant Arizona Harris settles into that lonely seat. The mission is deep into the Reich. As the formation climbs through the soup and breaks into the blinding blue of the upper atmosphere, Harris plugs in his heated suit. He checks the ammo feed belts, yards of copper-jacketed death. He checks his oxygen regulator. He is the eyes in the back of the crew's head.
Harris presses the throat microphone against his neck. Tail to pilot. Intercom check. Can you hear me, Skipper? The voice comes back crackling with static, distant and tinny in his headset. Loud and clear, Tail. Keep your eyes peeled. Fighter escort is turning back in 10 minutes. Then we're on our own. He is the guardian of the rear. He is the loneliest man in the sky. He thinks about the letter in his pocket, the one he hasn't mailed yet. He thinks about the ground far below. But mostly, he thinks about the job, because he knows that the 10 men inside this aluminum tube are a family, and he is the one watching their backs.
The formation tightens as they cross the English Channel. The friendly P-47 Thunderbolts wag their wings and peel off, turning back to England. The sky is suddenly empty, but it won't stay that way. On the horizon, black specks appear like dust on a camera lens. The wait is over. The loneliness is replaced by the roar of adrenaline. Sergeant Harris grips the handles of his machine guns. The Hornets are coming. And in less than an hour, this young man will face a test that defies physics, a test where the plane may die, but the gunner refuses to stop fighting.
The English Channel is gone. It has faded into the mist behind the formation. Now, below the wings of the Lovely Dovina, there is only the hostile patchwork of occupied Europe. The B-17 formation, a massive combat box of 30 bombers, is no longer flying, it is invading. They have crossed the invisible line. They have kicked the hornet's nest.
At 24,000 feet, the transition is subtle but terrifying. The radio chatter changes, the jokes stop, the breathing in the oxygen masks becomes shallower, faster. Every man on board, from the bombardier in the nose to Sergeant Harris in the tail, feels the shift. The friendly P-47 Thunderbolts, the little friends that have escorted them this far, rock their wings in a final salute. They are low on fuel. They have to turn back.
This is the moment of maximum vulnerability, the fighter gap. For the next 4 hours, the heavy bombers are alone. As the escorts dive away toward England, the sky seems painfully empty, but the German radar operators on the ground have been tracking them for an hour. The Jagdgeschwader, the fighter wings of the Luftwaffe, are already scrambling. They know exactly where the Americans are going.
First comes the flak. It doesn't look like fire. It looks like black, greasy smudges appearing by magic in the crystal-clear air. Whump, whump, whump. You don't hear the explosions over the roar of the engines, but you feel them. The plane lurches. Shrapnel, like red-hot hail, rattles against the aluminum skin. It is a game of Russian roulette played with heavy artillery. You cannot dodge it. You just sit there, hold your breath, and pray the next black puff isn't occupied by your aircraft.
Bandits, 12 o'clock high, level! The voice screams over the intercom, shattering the tension. The flak suddenly stops. This is the sign the crew fears most. The ground gunners stop firing because their own fighters are entering the kill zone. On the horizon, the specks materialize. They are not birds. They are Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, painted with yellow noses, hungry for blood.
From the tail gunner's position, Sergeant Harris watches the battle unfold like a spectator in a deadly amphitheater. He sees the German fighters climbing, positioning themselves against the sun to hide in the glare. They look like wolves circling a herd of bison. The lead B-17s open fire. The sky fills with tracers, lines of smoke and light crisscrossing the void. It's chaotic. It's beautiful. It's horrifying.
The Germans have changed their tactics. They used to attack from the rear, but the tail gunners made them pay for it. Now they try the head-on pass. They fly directly at the nose of the bombers at a closing speed of 600 miles per hour, firing 20mm cannons, then peeling off at the last second. But some still prefer the old way. Some still try to sneak up on the tail.
Harris grips the handles of his twin Brownings. The leather of his gloves creaks. His heart is hammering against his ribs. He spots a pair of FW-190s diving from 6 o'clock high. They are coming for him. He doesn't wait. He presses the triggers. The entire tail section shudders as the heavy machine guns roar to life, spitting out empty brass casings onto the floor. The smell of cordite, acrid, sulfurous gunpowder floods his oxygen mask.
I got him at 6 o'clock, Harris yells into the mic. The tracers walk toward the incoming fighter. The German pilot breaks off, diving away into the clouds. But there are too many of them. The formation is loosening up. A B-17 off the left wing is smoking. Another drops out of formation, trailing flame. The integrity of the combat box is failing. The wolves sense the weakness.
It is a sensory overload. The scream of the engines, the thud, thud, thud of the cannon striking the fuselage, the shouting on the intercom. It is a chaotic symphony of destruction. And in the middle of it, sitting on a bicycle seat at the very edge of the world, Sergeant Harris keeps firing. He swings the turret left, right, up, down. He is the stinging scorpion tail of the Lovely Dovina.
But the Luftwaffe isn't done. A fresh squadron of fighters appears from the clouds below. They are carrying air-to-air rockets. They line up on the stragglers. The Lovely Dovina has taken damage. She's lagging slightly. She is now the prime target. The hornet's nest has been kicked, and the swarm is descending on this single silver ship.
Harris sees the flash of a cannon muzzle. He sees the wing of a German fighter loom impossibly large in his sights. He braces himself. The world slows down. He doesn't know that in 10 seconds, the floor beneath him will vanish. He doesn't know that he is about to become a legend. He just keeps his finger on the trigger and holds the line. The impact is coming.
The air battle over Gotha has turned into a brawl. The formation is broken. The Lovely Dovina is no longer part of a protective box. She is a wounded animal limping through the stratosphere. Smoke trails from her No. 3 engine, marking her position for every Luftwaffe pilot in the sector.
The German fighters sense the kill. They stop swarming and start lining up. This is not a dogfight anymore. It is an execution. Inside the tail, Sergeant Arizona Harris is fighting for his life. The plexiglass around him is starred with bullet holes. The air inside the compartment is a freezing hurricane, wicking through the cracks in the armor. He can smell the burning oil from the engines up front. He screams into his mask, calling out targets, but his voice is lost in the roar of the 50 calibers. He is firing so continuously that the barrels of his guns are glowing cherry red against the gray sky.
At 12:05 p.m., a Messerschmitt 109 commits to a fatal run. It doesn't come from the front, it comes from the high side, diving diagonally across the bomber's fuselage. The German pilot pours 20mm cannon shells into the B-17's waist section, the weak point between the wings and the tail. The shells rip through the aluminum skin like a chainsaw through wet cardboard. They sever the hydraulic lines. They shatter the structural longerons that hold the plane together.
Harris feels the impact not as a sound, but as a violent shove. The entire world tilts. For a split second, time seems to suspend. He waits for the explosion. He waits for the fireball. But it doesn't come. Instead, there is a sound that is infinitely worse. It is the sound of metal screaming, a high-pitched, tearing shriek that vibrates through the soles of his boots and into his bones. It is the sound of a 30-ton machine dying.
Physics takes over. The structural integrity of the fuselage fails completely. The B-17, traveling at 150 miles per hour, snaps. It doesn't just break, it shears cleanly in two, just aft of the waist gunner's windows. The violence of the separation is absolute. The forward section, the wings, the cockpit, the engines, and the bomb bay noses over instantly. Heavy with fuel and bombs, it plummets like a stone, tumbling end over end toward the cloud layer below.
But the tail? The tail does something different. Harris is thrown forward against his gun sights, then slammed back into a seat. The intercom goes dead. The vibration of the engines vanishes instantly. The roar of the battle is replaced by the rushing wind. He looks forward, expecting to see the rest of the plane, expecting to see the waist gunners.
He sees nothing but open sky. Where the rest of the plane used to be, there is only a jagged, torn edge of aluminum and dangling wires sparking in the wind. The cables that connected him to the pilot, to the oxygen system, to the world, they are all severed. The tail section, lighter and more aerodynamic than the nose, doesn't plummet immediately. It catches the wind. It begins to float. It enters a flat, sickening spin, spiraling slowly like a falling leaf.
Imagine the horror of that realization. 1 second you are part of a crew, a team of 10 men fighting together. The next second, your universe has shrunk to a metal box the size of a closet. Harris is alone, truly alone. He checks his chest pack. His parachute is there, but the G-forces of the spin are pinning him to the wall. The centrifugal force is immense. To bail out, he would have to crawl uphill, against gravity, toward the jagged opening where the plane used to be.
The nose section is already gone, disappearing into the mist below, taking the pilot and the bombardier to their deaths. But the tail is lingering at 24,000 feet. It is a piece of debris, a piece of junk falling from the heavens. To the German pilot circling above, it is a dead kill. It is a trophy. They throttle back, confident that the fight is over. They watch the severed tail drifting down, expecting the gunner inside to be dead or unconscious from the shock.
But Arizona Harris is not dead. He is not unconscious. He shakes his head to clear the dizziness. He tastes blood in his mouth. He looks through the armored glass and sees the swastikas on the wings of the fighters circling him like vultures. He realizes he is falling. He realizes he is going to die. But as the adrenaline floods his system, a cold, hard resolve takes over. He is still in his seat. His hands are still on the triggers. And his guns are still loaded.
The Germans think the target is neutralized. They are wrong. As the tail section spins, stabilizing for a moment in the thin air, the twin barrels of the rear turret swing around. A burst of tracer fire erupts from the falling wreckage, streaking across the sky. It is an act of defiance that defies logic. The broken piece of the B-17 is fighting back. The collision didn't kill the gunner, it just made him angry. The long fall has begun.
The physics of a severed B-17 tail section are unpredictable. It does not fall like a stone. It catches the air. It acts like an uncontrolled glider, a heavy metal leaf tossing in a hurricane. It spins, it tumbles. For a human being inside, the G-forces are violent and disorienting. The blood rushes to the head, then the feet. The horizon, blue sky, white clouds, green earth, flashes by the plexiglass windows in a sickening, kaleidoscopic blur.
By all laws of survival, Sergeant Arizona Harris should be curled into a ball on the floor. He should be paralyzed by the terror of the fall. He is trapped in a severed metal tube, plummeting from 20,000 feet without a parachute he can reach. The oxygen line is cut, meaning he has only the residual air in his mask before hypoxia sets in. He is a dead man falling. But inside that tumbling aluminum coffin, something impossible happens.
The German fighter pilots, flying Focke-Wulf 190s, see the debris falling. To them, the tail is just scrap metal. They ignore it. They turn their attention back to the main bomber formation, looking to finish off the stragglers. They line up for another pass. They expose their bellies to the falling wreckage, assuming it is harmless. It is a fatal mistake.
From the spinning wreckage, a sound erupts. Thump, 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 thump. The twin 50 caliber machine guns are alive. Harris has fought through the dizziness. He has fought through the centrifugal force pinning him against the armor plate. He has managed to grab the spade grips of his weapon. He isn't just holding on, he is tracking targets.
Witnesses in the nearby B-17s, the crews of the Peggy D and the Hells Angels, watch in disbelief. They report seeing tracers streaking out of the falling tail section. Harris is firing in short, controlled bursts. He is leading the enemy fighters. Even as his world spins uncontrollably, he is forcing his brain to calculate the deflection. He is engaging the Luftwaffe on the way down.
Why does he do it? There is no hope of rescue. There is no soft landing. Why spend your last 60 seconds of existence fighting a war that is already over for you? Perhaps it is anger. Perhaps it is training. Or perhaps, in those final moments, he looks up and sees his friends, the other 9 planes in the squadron, still fighting for their lives. He realizes that every German plane he shoots at is one less German plane shooting at his brothers. He is buying them time with his own death.
A German fighter dives to finish off a damaged bomber, but suddenly breaks away. Tracers from below have flashed past its canopy. The pilot is confused. He looks down and sees the source of the fire. The broken tail, falling through 12,000 feet now, is still spitting death. Harris is clearing the 6 o'clock position for a plane he is no longer attached to. It is an act of defiance that transcends bravery. It is pure, raw will.
The air gets thicker as he falls, the temperature rises, the frost on the glass begins to melt. Below him, the details of the German countryside begin to sharpen. The abstract patchwork of green and brown resolves into individual trees, farmhouses, roads. The ground is rushing up to meet him at terminal velocity. The spin accelerates. The G-forces become crushing.
He fights gravity. He fights the nausea. He fights the enemy. He keeps the triggers depressed. The ammunition belt feeds smoothly. The empty casings rattle around his boots, floating in zero gravity moments before slamming back to the floor. He shoots until the very end. He shoots until the guns jam or the ammo runs dry.
At 5,000 feet, the firing finally stops. Maybe he lost consciousness. Maybe he ran out of bullets. Or maybe he just closed his eyes. The tail section, the Lovely Dovina's final sting, disappears into the low cloud layer. It falls silent.
The impact occurs moments later in a field near the town of Gotha. There are no survivors from the tail section. But high above, the surviving B-17s turn for home. They are alive because of the chaos. They are alive because for 2 minutes, a dead man refused to stop fighting. Arizona Harris rode the wreckage all the way down, fighting gravity and hell until the earth rose up to catch him.
The silence that follows a battle is heavy. It is a physical weight. On the afternoon of the mission, the surviving B-17s of the 306th Bomb Group touched down at their base in Thurley, England. The ground crews counted the holes. They patched the aluminum. But for the crew of the Lovely Dovina, there was no plane to patch. There were only empty hardstands and the stark reality of the missing aircrew report.
Back in the barracks, the mood was somber. Men packed up the personal effects of the missing. A few letters, a pack of cigarettes, a photograph of a girl back home. But as the debriefing officers began to interview the crews from the other planes in the formation, a story began to emerge. It was a story so incredible that at first, the intelligence officers thought it was a hallucination born of trauma.
The reports were consistent. Pilots and gunners from the Peggy D and the Hells Angels, flying adjacent to the Lovely Dovina, all stated the same thing. They had watched the bomber break in half. They had watched the nose section plummet. But they also watched the tail. The official record states, the tail gunner was observed to be firing at enemy aircraft while the tail section was falling and continued to fire until the wreckage disappeared into the overcast.
Think about what that means. Arizona Harris wasn't just a casualty of war. In those final, terrifying minutes, he became something else. Most men would have frozen. Most men would have closed their eyes and waited for the end. But Harris turned his death sentence into a final act of protection. He used his last breath to guard his brothers. He died as he lived, on duty.
The Aragonese military hierarchy, often slow to recognize individual acts of heroism in the chaos of mass aerial warfare, took notice. They couldn't ignore the sheer volume of witnesses. For his actions that day, Technical Sergeant Arizona T. Harris was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration the United States Army can bestow, just below the Medal of Honor.
The citation is brief, written in the dry language of the military, but the words carry a weight that echoes through history. It reads, "By his aggressive and accurate fire, he destroyed one enemy airplane and damaged another." Sergeant Harris continued to fire at the enemy until the tail section of his aircraft crashed into the ground. It is a formal acknowledgement of a miracle.
But medals are just metal and ribbon. The real legacy of Arizona Harris isn't in a box in a museum. It is in the lives of the men who came home that day. The men and the other bombers who saw those tracers spiraling down and knew that the Luftwaffe was being kept at bay. Because of Harris, a German fighter pilot broke off his attack. Because of Harris, another B-17 made it back to the English Channel. There are children and grandchildren alive today because a 20-year-old kid from Tempe, Arizona, refused to quit.
War is filled with stories of survival, of luck, and of tragedy. But the story of the falling gunner is different. It touches a primal chord in all of us. It asks a question: what would you do in the face of inevitable death? Would you despair, or would you fight? Arizona Harris gave us the answer. You fight until the ground rushes up to meet you. You fight until the silence takes you.
The wreckage of the Lovely Dovina has long since been cleared away from that German field. The aluminum has been recycled, the scars on the land healed by 80 years of seasons. But in the lore of the 8th Air Force, the legend remains untouched. It is the story of the fighting fall.
They say that pilots are closest to God, but on that cold day in 1944, God was watching a tail gunner. He fell from the heavens not like a stone, but like a warrior. He didn't have wings and he didn't have a prayer. All he had were 2 machine guns and a heart that refused to stop beating until the very last second.
Arizona Harris was listed as missing in action, then killed in action. But in a way, he never really hit the ground. He is suspended forever in that moment of absolute courage, spinning, fighting, and protecting. A legend forged in falling.
And as long as we tell this story, he is still up there, watching our 6 o'clock.
End of transmission.